This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
We are diving deep today into something really fascinating and, frankly, pretty critical. It's the digital financial scene over in Nepal. We've been, digging through the material you shared on this, and it paints quite a picture of how money and tech are mixing there.
It really does. The information provided shows this incredible acceleration. I mean, Nepal has sort of leapfrogged into digital finance. Huge convenience, definitely bringing more people into the formal system.
Yeah, that inclusion part seems key.
But in the material, the speed, this rapid shift, well, it hasn't happened without some pretty serious risks cropping up, especially around cybersecurity.
Right. So, okay, our mission here for this deep dive is to unpack all of that. We want to get a handle on just how fast this digital revolution has been in Nepal. What kind of cyber threats have popped up because of it? How are the regulators and the banks themselves actually reacting?
And what needs to happen next? Exactly. What are the urgent steps needed to really secure this whole new digital frontier for everyone involved? It's about figuring out what you really need to know about this because it's moving so fast.
You can think of it like mapping the journey from old school paper forms and queues to millions of people using smartphones for daily transactions. We're basically looking at the roadmap provided in these sources and also, importantly, the potential potholes.
Okay, let's start there then with that transformation. Because the speed mentioned in the material is, it's kind of staggering. It talks about a time not that long ago where banking meant physically going somewhere, waiting in line, lots of paper.
The traditional model, yes, access wasn't always easy or quick for, everyone across the country.
But the sources show this shift was dramatic, like bam. Suddenly, millions are using their phones for pretty much everything, paying bills, shopping online, sending money.
It's become really central to daily life, based on what we've read, a massive change in behavior.
So how? How did it happen so quickly? What were the main engines driving this according to the material?
The sources highlight two big things. First, just way more people getting online. Internet and mobile phone use just shot up across Nepal, so the access was there.
Okay.
And second, you had this explosion of digital wallets and payment systems. They specifically mention services like in Sewa, Khalti, and the Fonepay network as being really key players.
Right. Those names pop up a lot.
Yeah, we're talking tens of millions of people using mobile banking, digital wallets. The sources project huge numbers by early 2025, and things like QR code payments hitting, record levels. It's described as nothing short of a digital payment revolution on the ground.
The convenience factor is undeniable, obviously. But the material also really stresses that point about financial inclusion. Again, getting people who are maybe outside the formal system into this new digital economy.
Absolutely. The potential benefits are laid out very clearly. More opportunities, easier access. But it's definitely not presented as just a rosy picture. No, the sources are quite blunt, actually. They say this rapid digitalization has, and this is a direct quote, opened a Pandora's box of new threats.
Wow, Pandora's box. That's strong language.
It is. It suggests Nepal's financial system is now effectively on the front lines of what the material calls a global cyber war.
Okay, let's unpack that. Global cyber war. What kinds of specific threats are we talking about here, according to the sources? Do they differentiate between, say, big international hacks and maybe more local types of fraud?
They make that distinction very clearly, yes. On one hand, you have the sophisticated global threats, the kind that banks everywhere worry about.
Right.
And because Nepal's banks are plugged into the global financial network, SWIFT and all that, they're exposed.
So things like ransomware, the big stuff we hear about in the news.
Exactly. The material lists the usual suspects, ransomware, locking up data and demanding money, malware and phishing, which is all about tricking people into giving up logins via bad links or fake websites. And also supply chain attacks. That's where hackers target a vendor, like an IT provider that serves multiple banks. It's a way to potentially hit several targets at once. Very concerning.
And the material doesn't just talk theory, right? It gives actual examples from Nepal, sort of like wake-up calls.
It does, yes. Two major incidents are cited as sort of alarm bells. Back in 2017, there was this significant attempt to steal almost $5 million from NIC Asia Bank. They tried to exploit the SWIFT international payment system.
Wow, $5 million.
Nearly. And then, just a couple of years later, 2019, There was a coordinated attack hitting ATMs. 18 different banks were affected, and thieves got away with over 18 million rupees. So yeah, these big, complex, global-style threats are a real thing there.
Okay, but here's where reading the material, it felt like it took a turn. It gets really interesting because despite those big splashy attacks, the assessment from the experts and police cited in the sources is that the biggest ongoing threat day to day isn't necessarily those high-tech global hacks.
Yeah.
Something more local and maybe more human.
That's a crucial takeaway from the material, definitely. It states quite clearly that the vast majority of current fraud cases actually stem from social engineering.
Social engineering. Okay,
Yep.
break that down for us in this context. What does that mean practically?
Well, at its heart, it's about psychology. It's manipulation. Tricking people could be bank customers, could even be bank employees sometimes, into just giving up sensitive information, things like their passwords or those one-time codes, OTPs,
Right.
or even tricking them into making payments or transferring money themselves, but, under false pretenses.
So it's basically old school scams, just using new digital tools like con artists using phones and messages.
Pretty much, yeah. The material lists some really common schemes they're seeing in Nepal. There's vishing, that's voice phishing.
Yes.
Yeah, scammers calling people up, pretending to be from the bank. They might say your account's blocked or needs urgent verification, creating pressure to get you to spill your details.
Ah, I see. Creating panic.
Exactly. Then there's smishing, which is the same idea but using SMS text messages. Fake links, urgent requests via text.
Okay.
And of course, the classic fake lotteries or prizes. You've won, just pay this small tax or fee first to release your winnings.
Right, the advance fee fraud. And the material actually gives a reason, a term, for why these tricks, which maybe sound simple to some of us, are working so often there.
Yes, they use the term digital naivety, and they're careful to explain it's not meant as an insult.
Right.
It just reflects the reality that people adopted smartphones and digital payments incredibly quickly. Maybe faster than the general population learned the basic rules of online safety. Digital hygiene, you could call it.
So the tech adoption outpaced the security awareness.
That's exactly what the material argues, citing police and financial experts. This gap is apparently the main reason these social engineering scams are finding so much success right now.
Okay, so that's the picture. You've got these complex global threats lurking, but also this widespread vulnerability to simpler, human-focused scams. So what's being done? According to the material, how are the authorities, the institutions, responding? Let's start with the regulator, the National Bank of Nepal, the NRB.
Right, the NRB. Well, they've definitely seen the risks. The material says they've put together what it calls a fairly strict and comprehensive set of IT security rules and guidelines for the banks and financial institutions, the BFIs. They've tried to lay down a solid regulatory groundwork.
Okay, strict and comprehensive. What does that look like in practice? What are some key things the NRB is telling banks they have to do based on the sources?
The material points to several key areas. For corporate governance, banks need proper IT committees. They need a dedicated CISO or CIO, someone senior responsible for security. It embeds it at the top.
Makes sense. Accountability.
Then, risk management. This is big. They mandate annual IT audits, getting external eyes to check their systems every year. And also, regular vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, VAPT.
The APT,
Yeah.
right? Actively trying to find the holes.
Exactly, looking for weaknesses before the bad guys do. Then there's data security. Rules about encryption for sensitive customer data, requirements for secure data centers, they mention Tier 3 standards or better, and a really interesting one, data localization.
Keeping Nepalese data inside Nepal.
That's the idea, yeah. Plus, rules around incident response banks need formal computer security incident response teams, CRTs, ready to jump into action if something does happen. And finally, third-party risk management. This basically says banks are responsible for the security of their partners too, like fintechs or IT suppliers they work with.
That sounds pretty thorough, honestly. Like it aligns with what you might see in other countries with mature financial systems.
And the material says exactly that. On paper, it looks very solid, matches international practices. But
It's always a but.
there's a big but highlighted immediately. The main challenge identified isn't the rules themselves, it's the real execution of these rules across the board by all the institutions.
Ah, the implementation gap. Having the policy is one thing, making sure it actually happens consistently everywhere. That's the hard part.
Precisely.
So how are the banks themselves stepping up? Is it just about ticking the regulatory boxes? Or are some, especially the bigger ones, going beyond that minimum?
The materials suggest the leading banks get it. They understand compliance isn't enough. They're starting to build what the source calls layered defense systems, investing quite heavily, actually.
Layered defense.
We
That's what that involved. Tech. People.
Both. On the technology front, big banks like Nepal Bank are mentioned specifically for setting up their own cybersecurity monitoring centers, SOCs.
SOCs, right, for 247 monitoring?
Yep, constantly watching for threats. And using things like artificial intelligence, AI, to analyze transactions, looking for anomalies that might signal fraud.
Using AI to spot the weird stuff faster than humans can?
That's the goal. And there's also transformation happening internally. As simple transactions move online, banks are rethinking branches. NIC Asia Bank is noted for bringing in self-service kiosks.
Automating the base.
Right, which maybe frees up staff for other things. And speaking of staff training is getting more focus. Includes things like regular phishing simulations, testing their own employees, because as the material notes, staff can often be the weakest link if they're not trained.
Testing their own human firewall, so to speak.
Exactly. And we're also seeing partnerships. It's not just tech vendors. The material mentions Global IME Bank working directly with the Nepal police on public awareness campaigns, trying to educate people about the risks.
Okay, so regulation, banks investing, partnerships, efforts are clearly being made. But the material doesn't stop there. It lays out some urgent actions it says are still needed. What are the key recommendations aimed at the banks first? What more should they be doing?
For the banks, the recommendations really push them towards being more proactive, less waiting for attacks, more actively hunting for them. One key recommendation is shifting from just passive defense to active hunting or threat hunting.
It's rat hunting. So
Yep.
like proactively searching inside their own networks for intruders, not just waiting for an alarm bell.
Exactly. Actively looking for subtle signs of compromise. It requires specific skills, specialized tech, but it's seen as crucial. Another big one is making staff training continuous and practical.
Not just once a year.
Right. The material argues annual tick box training isn't enough. It needs to be ongoing, maybe with unexpected simulations, really embedding vigilance in everyone. Every employee needs to be part of that human firewall.
Okay.
And perhaps most critically, given the social engineering problem, banks need to launch large-scale, creative customer education campaigns. The material suggests banks should even team up on this. Use simple videos, maybe on TikTok or Facebook, platforms people actually use.
Make it accessible.
Yes, and hammer home that golden rule from the sources. A bank employee will never ask you for a password or OTP code. Just getting that one message across could stop so much fraud.
That seems like a really simple but powerful message.
It is. Finally, for banks, strengthen those third-party controls. Really rigorous security checks on all partners and suppliers. Because, as the source says, a vulnerability in your partner is effectively your vulnerability.
Makes sense. Your defenses are only as strong as your weakest link, including your suppliers. Okay, those are for the banks. What about the regulator, the NRB? What urgent recommendations does the material have for them?
For the NRB, a major recommendation is to sharpen its focus on effective supervision. It's about ensuring the real implementation of their rules, not just checking if policies exist on paper.
So more rigorous audits,
Yeah.
real teeth behind the enforcement.
That's the idea. More frequent, deeper dives into bank security practices and being ready to impose meaningful penalties for non-compliance. Another vital point is creating a single center for exchanging threat information.
A central hub.
Yes. The material points out that currently, information sharing between banks about new threats or scams is often weak or slow. They need a platform, maybe overseen by NRB and the National CERT team, for rapid, ideally anonymous, sharing of threat intelligence across the entire sector. Coordination is key.
Okay, better info sharing. What else?
Speeding up the launch of a full-fledged regulatory sandbox, they have something called an innovation hub, but the material argues for a formal
A
sandbox.
sandbox. Like a safe space to test new financial tech.
Exactly. A controlled environment with clear rules for testing things like new AI-driven lending models or innovative neobanking concepts before they're rolled out to the public. Test safely first.
Got it. And there was one more point, maybe the toughest one.
Yes, what the material calls arguably the most difficult but also the most important task, addressing the critical personnel shortage at the state level in cybersecurity.
The skills gap.
A major one. The recommendation is for national programs, maybe involving the Ministry of Education, universities, to really ramp up training and retraining of cybersecurity specialists. And crucially, creating the right conditions, competitive salaries, interesting projects to actually keep those skilled people working in Nepal's financial sector rather than losing them overseas, fighting the brain drain.
Wow. Okay, so pulling all this together, the picture from the material is one of incredible progress in digital finance in Nepal, a real leap forward. But it's happening alongside these very serious, constantly changing security threats.
That really captures the essence of it, yes. The speed of adoption is undeniable. The regulations on paper are good, and the leading banks are definitely investing, building defenses.
But it keeps coming back to the human side, doesn't it? That seems to be the recurring theme, the Achilles heel.
It really does. The material's conclusion is quite stark on this. It identifies the current weakest points as that digital naivety among the public, making them targets for social engineering, and the nationwide shortage of qualified cybersecurity professionals to build and manage the defenses. These two human factors, the analysis suggests, genuinely risk undermining all the progress made on the tech and regulatory fronts. They could nullify those efforts.
So it's this constant sort of invisible battle being fought.
Absolutely. And the material stresses that winning isn't just about buying the latest firewall. It needs joint, coordinated efforts. Banks need to protect and educate. The regulator needs to enforce and help build that human capacity. It's an ecosystem effort.
And the ultimate prize in this battle, according to the sources, isn't just protecting data or money, it's protecting trust.
That's the core of it. Trust is the bedrock of finance, digital or otherwise.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really interesting thought to chew on, building on that whole human factor idea. Given how embedded digital finance is now in our lives, and how clever these threats are getting, how much of the responsibility for staying safe online, for practicing that digital hygiene ultimately falls? Well, how much falls on you, the user?